My name is Richard Kerr, and I'm 53, and I believe my first time being trafficked to England was on February of 1977.
Richard Kerr has suffered for over 30 years in silence, blocking out the horrors of his past at the hands of what he describes as very powerful people. As a teenager, he was introduced to the world of Westminster. He says he was trafficked from Northern Ireland and that this picture was taken by one of his abusers.
I was used as a boy toy. I was an object, a sexual object.
Rumours of an alleged paedophile ring in the top echelons of society have been circulating for years. But for the first time, Richard's account of what happened to him as a boy links three locations. Dolphin Square, a luxury complex popular with MPs and civil servants. Kincora Boys' Home in Belfast, where boys were systematically abused. And Elm Guesthouse, a former gay brothel where young children are also said to have been molested. We brought Richard back to England from America, along with his counsellor, to revisit his past. His memories were vivid and distressing.
I'm sorry.
A cottage industry of conspiracy theories has built up around this story, but Richard insists a VIP paedophile ring did exist, and it's time for the truth to be told.
They were men who had control and power over others.
They were politicians, you believe?
Some I do.
His story starts in Belfast in the 1970s at the now notorious Kincora Boys' Home. He was placed in care from the age of 5 and sent to Kincora at 14, where he was abused. There, he claims he and 2 other boys were hand-picked to be trafficked to London and sexually abused by further men. Both of them, he says, have since taken their own lives.
We were throwaways. That's how I felt. I felt a throwaway. I was exploited.
Richard says in 1977, when he was 15, he was put on a ferry to Liverpool, abused by a man there, then escorted to Manchester and later sent to London. He claims he was picked up in a car at King's Cross Station, taken to a hotel close by and forced to have sex with multiple men.
I had no way to get to England. I had no money. You know, I was under the state care. They were responsible for me. I had no one else to turn to. This is the place that I remember very well, and the memories that I tried to block many, many years ago.
How do you feel about the boy you remember here?
Very emotional. Very painful. I'm sorry. I'm scared.
He says he's faced years of intimidation and is still being warned not to talk by people he believes are connected to the alleged paedophile ring. Some of his sharpest memories are of the fear he felt when he says he was visited by detectives on 2 separate occasions and told to keep quiet.
They told me to stop talking about Kincora, and that they intimidated me here. There is another place where in Preston, Lancashire, they told me they could put me away.
He claims he was trafficked across the UK, including to Rochdale, Lancaster, Manchester and Wolverhampton. But it's here, at Elm Guesthouse in South London, that he says he faced his most violent experience. It was raided by police in 1982. Newspapers at the time said that at least 3 MPs were questioned. It's claimed the late Sir Cyril Smith was a visitor. It was being used as a gay brothel, and it was alleged children as young as 10 were abused. It's the first time Richard's been back, and the flashbacks come fast.
I was tied up here. I do remember that. I don't know why I was tied up, but I was tied up. With my hands behind my back. I do remember that. Laying down, and they took photographs. Other men were here. Other men came into the room. It just wasn't this one man. There were other men here.
In the 80s, it was reported officers found whips, chains and ropes.
I don't mean to be this way. It happened. You know, I just don't mean to be... It's just holding on to all this sometimes. And I can't believe this happened.
In the 1970s in Piccadilly Circus, Richard said he was picked out from a group of boys sitting upstairs inside the wimpy fast food restaurant.
Would you describe the activity round here as a paedophile ring?
Oh, you know, yeah. There's no question about that. Oh, yes, definitely.
Why are you so convinced of that?
Because of the people I was involved with. And the boys were in groups, even though we were spread across the tables. And the way they set it up, the clients and locations.
One of the locations he claims he was taken to in a taxi was an apartment complex in the heart of Westminster known as Dolphin Square. It is now at the nexus of the Met Police's Operation Midland, which is also looking into alleged murders.
I could have been 16, 15, 17. I remember going in with this guy, and he told me to sit down, relax, and explain about his glasses. And he said he had a Waterford Crystal, and he wanted me to have a brandy, and we had more brandy. And then we had a sexual encounter in here.
Did you ever meet any of the men that have been named to have had alleged contact with young boys?
I just don't want to get into that right now. I really don't. I'm talking to my attorneys, legal.
And why is that? Why don't you want to talk about it yet?
I'm still concerned. There are some people still around, and I'm concerned. Most of these people were very well off, but most of them had positions of power that had influence over others.
Why don't you feel yet, after all these years, that you can name your abusers who were in power?
I'm still in some fear, even though I'm willing to take the courage. I need to know that I can have faith in our government.
And central to achieving that trust, he says, is getting the government to acknowledge what he calls the untold story of Kincora Boys Home, that he claims goes way beyond Northern Ireland. In 1981, 3 senior staff at Kincora were convicted of abusing 11 boys. There's been 2 judge-led inquiries, but allegations of a high-level cover-up continue. Despite claims that abuse in Kincora was connected to England, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, has so far ruled out including it in the official child abuse inquiry.
Right now, when they're not willing to bring Kincora into Westminster, that just tells that the message it sends to me is that there's some kind of cover-up, and there has been.
It's claimed British security services knew about the crimes in Belfast but did nothing to stop them, using the knowledge to blackmail and extract intelligence from influential men. In 1975, as the Troubles were taking hold, a young army intelligence officer called Brian Gemmell was working undercover and tried to blow the whistle. We brought Richard to meet him for the first time.
You must be Richard.
Yes,
I'm Brian Richard. It's good to meet you. Come on in. Let's talk. Come on in.
Brian says he put in an official report about Kincora to a senior MI5 officer, but to his astonishment, he claims he was ordered to stop digging and forget about it.
That's the thing that hits me. That if I'd really pushed the thing through in 75, 76, You could have been rescued. I'm sorry.
Thank you for that. I've been in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and I have survival guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's a calling. I believe it's a calling, and I'm not here. This is less selfish of myself. I'm not here to think of me.
Right.
I get peace from that.
Yes.
And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
But it's hard to heal without the truth, and Brian now believes to establish that Kincora must be added to the UK inquiry. Why do you think it should be?
I think 2 words, Richard Kerr. I think Richard's transporting over to the United Kingdom mainland to be abused rather than just being abused in Northern Ireland speaks volumes. It ties the two together. Here's a Kincora boy that knows what goes on in Dolphin Square.
Do you think there are still efforts to try and cover up?
I do.
Richard is open about the fact he went on in his adult life in London to be paid for sex with men. It was, he says, the only life he knew. He later emigrated to America.
Would you concede that you became a male prostitute?
I would answer it this way. I didn't become. That's what they made me to be. I had no awareness that I would be that. They shaped me, groomed me, and that's what my life was.
He says he's decided to speak out now for his 2 friends trafficked with him, no longer alive to tell their tales.
It's not about me. It's about the voices that didn't have a voice, and I don't know, my spirit is driving me.
And he has this message for the Home Secretary, Theresa May.
I want those who are responsible brought to justice. Yes, we can't fail in this. We just can't. If we do this now, if we fail on this, we are allowing this to continue. That they can get away from this because people have decided to turn the other way.
The idea those inside the corridors of power were part of a sophisticated UK-wide paedophile ring has been dismissed by some. But Richard is adamant there was one and that he is living proof. Well, John, the survivors hope that today would be the beginning of the end of their search for truth, which has evaded them for so many years. You may not have heard of Kincora Boys' Home, but the allegations of what went on inside go to the very top of the British government and the security services. At least 29 boys were abused in the home, and one of the abusers is believed to have been an MI5 agent. It's claimed that the boys were collateral damage, were able to be systematically raped because intelligence was deemed more important. And yet the British government has so far refused to include Kincora in the UK-wide child abuse inquiry, saying that it is a devolved matter. But that is not enough for the men who have endured years of abuse. They went to court today to fight for witnesses to be compelled to give evidence and for MI5 to hand over vital documents. It is a case that strikes at the very heart of issues of trust and the state, and the survivors say it is a case of now or never. They were abused as children. Now these middle-aged men believe this is their last chance to unravel what they allege is a cover-up by security services going back decades. A High Court bid to investigate the real story of Kincora Boys' Home, not here in Belfast, but in London, and the UK inquiry chaired by Justice Goddard.
This has to go to the top. It has to go to Westminster. Westminster has the authority, they have the power, and they have most of the documents.
I just can't even get a night's sleep. It's just always in my head, things that's happened to me.
In 1981, 3 senior staff at Kincora were convicted of sexually abusing 11 boys in their care. Joseph Mains, his assistant Raymond Semple, and the housefather William McGrath, the leader of an extreme loyalist movement called Tara. But attempts to establish the truth about British state collusion and what went on here have so far been blocked. It's been persistently alleged that William McGrath was an informant for British intelligence. But after 2 judge-led inquiries, MI5's involvement is still unclear. There were complaints about Kincora from as early as 1967, but the scandal didn't unravel until 1980.
I was just thinking of the other boys too.
Richard Kerr and other survivors are adamant the current historical abuse inquiry in Northern Ireland will not uncover what really went on inside these walls. Led by Sir Anthony Hart, it lacks the powers to force MI5 to hand over documents and cannot compel witnesses to testify. Colin Wallace is a former Army intelligence officer who blew the whistle more than 40 years ago. He, like the victims, are pushing for Kincora to be brought into the Westminster inquiry, something the Home Affairs Committee have also called for. He spent years trying to raise the alarm, speaking to his superiors, the press, but was cast as a fanciful Walter Mitty character. Time and time again, Parliament said they had no evidence that abuse was taking place in Kincora, but his warnings went to the very top.
This document was the...
Tonight, he reveals a letter he sent to Margaret Thatcher as late as 1990.
I think what information we did have in the 1970s was more than adequate to have brought a prosecution. I just find it so hard to believe why somewhere along the line the amazing security apparatus that we had in Northern Ireland in 1974, and it was really comprehensive, all the different agencies, why they failed to intervene to stop that at any point during those years.
In the 1970s, he was a rising star. Here he sits alongside Terence O'Neill, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. Officially, he was a senior information officer in the MOD, but he was also working as a member of the ultra-secret Army Psychological Operations Unit, attempting to control and infiltrate paramilitary groups. That led him to Kincora. In 1973, he briefed journalists in the hope they would start investigating, but it didn't work. The following year, increasingly exasperated, the army and police were aware of the abuse claims, but nothing was being done. He sent a memo to his superiors, appealing to them to take action. Dated the 8th of November 1974, it reads,
I find it very difficult to accept that the RUC consistently failed to take action on such serious allegations unless they had specifically received some form of policy direction. Such direction could only have come from a very high political or police level. If the allegations are true, then we should do everything possible to ensure that the situation is not allowed to continue. The youngsters in these hostels almost certainly come from problem families, and it is clear that no one will fight their corner unless we do.
Well, bearing in mind we're dealing with the army and the police, they themselves had a lot of authority. It is virtually impossible for any organisation to stop a chief constable or indeed a senior police officer from doing their duty. And I can only conclude, therefore, that whoever did stop action being taken had to have considerably more power. And in the context of Northern Ireland, that must have been from London. I can think of no one in Northern Ireland who had that level of authority.
Colin was vilified, discredited and wrongly jailed for manslaughter. The conviction was later quashed. He always maintained he had told the authorities boys were being abused from the early 1970s, but those allegations were dismissed. Then, in 1990, Margaret Thatcher admitted that her government had misled Parliament and the public about Wallace's role, but she didn't address the issue of child abuse. A few months later, he wrote this letter, shared with Channel 4 News for the first time.
Instead of the positive response promised by ministers, each of my letters has been fobbed off with absurd excuses. Despite the assurances given to Parliament that previous errors in ministerial statements have been corrected, the government is still misleading the House over those issues.
Just months after Colin left Northern Ireland, this man, Richard Kerr, now living in America, entered Kincora. Colin says if his warnings were acted on, Richard and many other boys could have been saved from years of sexual abuse. It took 7 years since he first raised the alarm for the home to close.
Richard has lived here for more than 20 years, but it's only really in the past 12 months that he's found the strength to speak out about what happened to him in his early life. He says he feels safer in Dallas, but he's still very anxious at this stage to reveal all.
He came here hoping to start afresh. The shadow of the Kincora scandal, though, still rests heavy on him.
I'm angry at the authority figures, the people above them, knowing that this was going on. That's where my anger is. To those who turned a blind eye, to those children and me. Turned a blind eye because they believed they could get away with it.
Have you received specific threats about speaking out?
I received threats back in 1980 and 1979. Reliable sources are telling me that I need to stop talking.
Despite the fact Colin's career and life were destroyed for many years, he says he doesn't regret what he tried to expose.
I genuinely believe I did my best, but I also feel very sad that I wasn't able to do more. My job, don't forget, was helping to fight terrorism. Kincora was a small but fairly stressful sideline, and I found it frustrating more than anything else because it should have been very easy to resolve, and I suppose I still grates with me that we weren't able to do more than we did do.
He became one of the biggest whistleblowers of his generation. Like the victims, he firmly believes this is the last opportunity to establish if there was an MI5 cover-up that allowed boys to be abused in Kincora to protect intelligence.
I've been through life with not trusting anybody. I don't get involved with anybody. That is why I'm 57, never been married, no children. And that is, I'm just an ordinary guy. I wanted the same things that everybody else had, and I just had to look at it from outside.
What would you say to those looking on in Westminster today?
Let us have our day in the sunshine. You know, we're getting old, so draw a line under this.
And if a line isn't drawn, they fear they could remain on the outside, the state's alleged role in their troubled past covered up forever.
Cordelia Lynch. Now joining us from Washington, D.C. is Jim Gamble, the former senior police officer and head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, known as CEOP, from 2004 to 2011. Jim Gamble, you believe, do you not, that this inquiry should be moved from Northern Ireland into a UK-wide aegis? Why?
Two reasons. The first, context. There needs to be an overarching inquiry which places in context all of the issues around the nature of this abuse. And we call it historic, but as you can see from the interviews we just witnessed, there's nothing historic about the pain those survivors are still suffering. But critically, the second reason is because you need the power to prevent people hiding behind the context of the history of Northern Ireland and pulling the blanket of the Official Secrets Act over them. Now, I've been a former head of Special Branch in Belfast. I think if there has been wrongdoing, if it's been MI5, Special Branch, or whomever from the Security and Intelligence Services, if they have covered up, if they have failed to act, then that needs to be exposed, and it needs to be exposed now, before people are too old to be held to account or before they hide behind some nebulous defence.
But are you confident that we will ever know who these high-level abusers were?
Well, if we don't give it the power that Justice Goddard has, the power to summon people to give evidence, the power to waive the protection of the Official Secrets Act, we'll never find out. That is why, I mean, Sir Anthony Hart has done a fabulous job in Northern Ireland, and I hear lots of people, lots of survivors and others credit, and praise what he's doing. But to get to the heart of this, we need it to be moved centre stage to Westminster, and actually, the more that's exposed, we need a contemporary criminal investigation. We need to find out, were there people at the heart of government, in authority, within special branch or the security and intelligence services, who perverted the course of justice, who allowed children then to continue suffering and children to be engaged by predators when it could have been stopped. If that's the case, then we need to identify them and hold them to account now. And of course, the best way to do that in an overarching strategic sense is through Justice Goddard's review.
The problem is that all these people are likely to be extremely old, some of them very infirm and some of them dead. I mean, is there really any prospect that we will deal with this in the way that you're demanding?
Well, I think there is, because we need to get access to documents. Intelligence, when intelligence is collected, there's an analysis applied. And there will be documents somewhere which will give us a greater insight into this. There will be some people who are still alive, who were there in the aftermath. And if we're going to get people to have confidence in the competence and integrity of institutions of the state, then we need to learn from the lessons of the past, and covering them up for another generation won't do. This is the opportunity of a lifetime to shine a light into a very dark place and to help people come to terms with what happened to them. That needs to be done with absolute integrity, absolute transparency, and absolute authority. And it won't be done, and people won't be satisfied unless it goes under the Goddard review, where they have the critical power to allow them to ask questions and demand answers.
Jim Gamble in Washington, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
The inquiry into child abuse in Northern Ireland has begun to examine what happened in Kincora Boys' Home in East Belfast. At least 29 boys were abused at the home between the late 1950s and the early 1980s. The inquiry will look at whether state agencies, including the intelligence services, knew that children were being abused and covered it up. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Chris Buckler.
The sexual abuse that took place at the Kincora Boys' Home led to a scandal. But decades later, there are persistent claims that all the secrets of this house have not been revealed, and that people in positions of power were involved in a cover-up. Today, Northern Ireland's Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry began examining whether the police, MI5 and MI6 among others, knew that boys were being groomed at Kincora and abused.
You will also hear me refer to, and you will read, claims of state-sponsored child prostitution, paedophile rings, blackmail and cover-ups.
Many of the allegations relate to the 1970s, a time of violence and turmoil in Northern Ireland, when knowledge was valuable, particularly in gathering intelligence. And it's been claimed that the late William McGrath, who was one of the paedophiles who ran Kincora, was at one stage employed by MI5. Clint Massey was one of those abused by McGrath.
I firmly believe somebody up there knew and said, right, we'll let this run.
When you say the authorities, who do you mean?
MI5 and Army intelligence.
There have already been investigations and inquiries. However, many of those who were abused insist they have never revealed the full truth. Lives were scarred at Kincora, but this latest inquiry faces a significant challenge in separating the facts from years of allegations. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Belfast.
A former Army intelligence officer has told the BBC that an investigation into abuse at a boys' home in East Belfast back in the 1970s was stopped by MI5. 5 years later, the police discovered evidence of abuse at the Kincora home. Northern Ireland's First Minister has described the child abuse there as a national scandal that needs to be the subject of a new inquiry. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Chris Buckler.
Throughout the 1970s, teenage boys were taken to Kincora when they'd nowhere else to go. They arrived here from broken homes and dysfunctional families, but they ended up in a place where many were routinely sexually abused. In the early 1980s, 3 men, including the prominent loyalist William McGrath, were convicted of a series of offences. But 5 years earlier, at the height of the Troubles, an army intelligence officer had raised concerns about Kincora, based on information from an agent known as Royal Flush. However, a senior MI5 man ordered him to halt his inquiries.
He told me not just to stop any investigation into Kincora and McGrath, but to drop Royal Flush. That was it.
There have long been claims of a cover-up at Kincora, and suggestions that people of influence were involved in abusing boys here. There is an inquiry taking place in Northern Ireland into historical institutional abuse, and that includes Kincora. However, its powers of investigation are extremely limited, and Northern Ireland's First Minister has indicated that he doesn't believe it's capable of uncovering what truly happened here. As a result, he's written to the Prime Minister and asked for the Kincora scandal to be included in the abuse inquiry that's being planned by the Home Office.
People did take their lives after having been questioned by the police on these issues. There are matters which, when you put them together, would indicate clearly there was the knowledge of people in very high positions in Northern Ireland at that time.
And some claim what started at this care home had links to places and people far away from the streets in East Belfast, where Kincora is a word associated with scandal and shame.
Paedophile groups in the 70s formed very close alliances purely for protection, if nothing else. And it may well be that some of those links are very important when we think of why, for example, the army and the police were not allowed to take action.
Like so much of the sexual abuse now under investigation, the crimes at Kincora are regarded as historical. But for victims like Clint Massey, it's a past that still haunts.
I just want to see the building gone. I want to turn up here one day and just see an empty space. Then I'll know it's gone, you know.
This house hid many secrets, and some of them are still waiting to be exposed. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Belfast.
When Sir Anthony Hodd's inquiry into historical abuse in Northern Ireland begins looking into the notorious Kincora boys' home today, one of the allegations it will be exploring is whether the intelligence services were involved in covering up what happened there from the 1950s. There's no question that children were abused at Kincora. 3 men who ran the home in East Belfast were convicted in 1981 of abusing 11 boys, but at least 29 were abused there right up to the early 1980s. We're joined now from Belfast by Clint Massey, a survivor of abuse at Kincora, and by the investigative journalist Chris Moore, who's followed the story since 1980. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Clint Massey, how long were you at Kincora?
I was in Kincora for approximately 8 months.
And how old were you when you arrived there?
I was 16.
And what happened in your time there?
From day one, I was regularly raped every morning. That was my way of getting woke up out of bed.
And your abuser was a man called William McGrath, is that right, who was later convicted?
Yeah, that's right, that was William McGrath.
And this happened throughout your time there?
Yes, that was a regular occurrence.
And were you able to tell anyone about it at the time or in the years immediately afterwards?
No. I mean, I was 16 at the time. I had a social worker who was 22 at the time. Young woman. I mean, a different era. You didn't mention things like that.
A different era, and particularly as far as Northern Ireland was concerned, time during the Troubles where you also had the security dimension of what was happening around you.
Well, I mean, just outside the door of the home, it was on the verge of civil war at times. You know, I mean, there was armoured cars roaming the streets everywhere. So it paled into insignificance when you saw the big picture. And nobody would want to listen to somebody like myself.
Chris Moore, when did you start to learn about what had happened at Kincora and get interested in the story?
Well, the story first emerged in 1980, and it was a story about apparently there was what was called in the newspaper that broke the story a homosexual vice ring. And the intrigue came when the 3 staff were coming to trial. it emerged that one of them, William McGrath, was of particular interest because of his loyalist connections. He ran a small paramilitary group called Tara. He was involved in organising meetings in Orange halls, in Unionist halls. He gave talks about the doomsday scenario, about how the IRA and republicanism was going to take over the country, and he had good connections with the Unionist family. Jim Molyneux would have been a visitor to his home. He would have had meetings with Ian Paisley in Ian Paisley's church and other premises. So he went to Stormont with Ian Paisley. So this was a man who was well connected. And when he decided that he was going to face trial, he was going to deny all the charges until the last moment, and then he decided that he would plead guilty. So, in effect, there was no ventilation in the court of the facts surrounding the case.
Right, and when this starts to be looked into today by the abuse inquiry, I mean, both MI5 and MI6 have agreed to be central participants in the hearing. Is it your hope that therefore we get to the bottom of this question of whether the intelligence services were involved in covering up what happened at the time?
Well, it's quite apparent to people like Clint and other survivors of abuse at Kincora that there has been a cover-up. And the cover-up here has caused them as much pain as the physical and sexual abuse that they suffered whilst in Kincora. As regards MI5 or 6 or the Ministry of Defence coming along and taking part in this inquiry, the inquiry doesn't have any powers to compel. That's kind of worrying. These people from MI5 and from MI6 and from the Ministry of Defence have singularly not cooperated really up to now. In fact, the 2 original police investigations were blocked by the fact that MI5 did not produce an officer for questioning by the police on 2 occasions, on 2 separate police investigations. The first one by the RUC, the second one was by the RUC, but it was under the leadership of Sir George Terry, the then Chief Constable of Sussex.
They have agreed to be participants in this hearing. Clint Massey, what did you think at the time about the reasons for why it took so long to get to grips with what was happening? Eventually there were criminal proceedings and these 3 men, including your abuser, were convicted.
I think it took so long because there was people to be protected. People had to be moved out of the picture so that a type of inquiry could take part, but no real damage done to the structure of the security forces. They were still going to do what they were going to do. And we were just collateral damage. But they had their assets to protect, and they moved them out of the picture for a while.
And so you still think there is more to learn and understand about what happened at Kincora and its implications. Would it have been important to you to have this included in the Goddard inquiry?
It would be important because with the best will in the world, the Banbridge inquiry, most people couldn't point to Banbridge on a map. It is a big story in Northern Ireland, but to people in the south of England or Birmingham, it's small beer. But if it's mentioned long enough in Westminster, then people will start to ask questions about Kincora. Why is this so important? Why does this name keep on cropping up?
But Chris Moore, is it your hope that is, even if it's not part of the Goddard inquiry, that the fact that Sir Anthony Hart's inquiry is going to look into it today gives you the answers that you've been looking for?
I've got concerns about it, to be truthful. I'm not sure that it does, and I think that the survivors who now realise that for 10 years a man who was raping young men in Kincora, like Clint, William McGrath, seemed to be protected. He wasn't certainly prosecuted, and all attempts to have him prosecuted were knocked back. And the MI5 operation here made quite certain that the police and an army intelligence officer were not allowed to progress the information about what was going on inside the home and have a court case. So I think the truth is that the survivors that I've spoken to, and Clint's here, so I think what they really wanted was an inquiry. The Goddard inquiry would have the powers to compel people to come forward. And I think that is still in their minds as being necessary.
Chris Moore and Clint Massey, thank you both.